So today we're going to talk about how to master your data to increase your income. And so my name is Dan Meyer, and I'm going to walk you through some tips on how to do that. And we're going to cover like really 5 things today. First of all, we're going to talk about how big data is a wave of disruption. It's causing massive disruptions in every industry, in every type of business. We're going to talk about how data analytics is a process, and you have to be able to understand the entire process to be able to master the data in your business. We're going to talk about how to find the right data, which requires a map. You have to be able to look at your data throughout your business like you're mapping something. We're going to talk about making impactful data visualizations. It's quite hard to do, so we're going to talk about some tips on how to make some better visualizations. And then storytelling with data, which is how you influence decision makers. Now, this is a pretty deep course. I condensed it. I made it very layman, so we're not going to sit here and go through a lot of complicated technical stuff. It's going to be very much just a kind of high-level perspective of my experience and what I know about analytics and why I want to share it with you. A little about me. So I have about 20 plus years of experience working with analytics or data analysis work. Most of my professional experience came with Wells Fargo Bank. I worked for 15 years with Wells Fargo as a senior analyst. For the last 7 or 8 years, though, after I left Wells Fargo, I set up my own business. I've been teaching people how to be analysts, talking to companies about how to use more data in their decision making, talking to people about how to really level up with their business. I've been doing a lot of that in Asia, and I just recently moved to Florida, and so I'm kind of expanding my business towards the East Coast and up here in Chicago. So I also have a master's in education, so I was a teacher before I was an analyst. So my favorite thing to do is talk about analytics in a way that could help empower people. I have a company called Sonic Analytics. Since 2011, we have trained over 8,000 people, conducted over 186 trainings. I've worked on over 50 projects. I've worked, I could mention it in Southeast Asia, predominantly in the Philippines. I've done trainings and consulting gigs across Southeast Asia, as well as here in the US. So this is my absolute favorite thing to do, to talk to people about how to get more value out of the data they have in their business. I've worked with a really wide range of companies. If you look at this, it's quite a broad spectrum of types of businesses. Some are retail, some are fast food servicing, some are banks, some are news organizations. The one thing they all have in common is they all have a lot of data, and they're all struggling to use that data effectively. Doesn't matter how big or how powerful or how amazing a company is, they have to really look at data in a way that allows them to constantly optimize it. So I want to share with you a few of those things that some of these companies do. Before I go on, though, I want to learn a little bit about you. So I'll just ask real quick if you could introduce who you are, so we all have a name to put with a face, what you do for a living, and what brought you here today. What were you hoping to get out of this workshop? That will help me kind of guide how we cover the next hour or so. And we're going to talk for about an hour, and then after that we're going to have lunch. And if you have any questions as you go along, feel free to ask me. But we'll start with you, Peter. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Peter, and I'm in the insurance business. I worked for Allstate for a little bit, and I opened my own agency.
Okay.
I have 3 agents and wanting to expand to Wisconsin pretty soon here.
Okay.
So yeah, I heard about your class at Austin's training, and I figured come see how I can use data to help my business.
Great. Insurance, obviously you have a lot of data about the customers you have, the financial products they have, the demographics of different groups of people fit into different types of products. So it's very data driven in insurance. I'm sure you're well aware of.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm John Dillman. I'm the IT manager for Power Team. Do a lot of different tasks, keep websites, registration, keep track of people, and our marketing campaigns and all that. And try to keep them efficient.
Okay, great. And so you're deep in the data then?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Cynthia Jackson, Administrative Operations Beyond Cleaning Services.
Okay.
I do the everyday paperwork, connecting the bidding. So just to take this class and come and see how I can better affect to keep my files and making sure that when the government, hopefully he doesn't come after us and have everything in order.
Right, you're ready in case they do, right?
Yes,
Yeah, it's a big part of it. Good, awesome. And finally, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm with Beyond Cleaning Services as well. My name is on the door. I make a lot of
cool.
decisions, but I'm not very effective with the process of utilizing data and reaching people who are being reached.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to expand that avenue of what I do and who I am.
Great, great. Okay, so that's awesome. And you guys all have different experiences that bring you here, which is great because I want you guys to think about these real quick house rules. I always talk about these before I give a talk. We're all from different perspectives. We all have different backgrounds and experiences. In fact, nobody does data the same way. No company, no individuals. Everyone kind of does it their own way. So we have to be respectful of those differences. Not everyone will understand everything right away. If you don't, please raise your hand. You're not going to be stopping me at all if you ask a question. Be bold, right? Ask questions. Figure out how to apply the stuff we're talking about. A lot of these things are going to be concepts or terminologies or things you may not actually know how to apply. So ask a question. Take a chance on that and be innovative. Don't be stuck with what you can do right now. Think about what you can do, 6 months from now, a year from now. What do you want to be at? The idea here is to figure out how to level up what you're at. And you can't level up in one day. You got to take a process, and we'll talk about how to build that process. And then I say no nosebleeds. What I mean by that is it is technical, right? There's a lot of things out here that you probably haven't heard of, or if you have, maybe you haven't been able to apply them because analytics is a massive field. It covers all kinds of stuff, and it's growing exponentially right now. So if I talk about something that's just too much, again, please ask me to explain it a different way or to give an example, and I'll be happy to. I'm not even an expert in all this stuff. So sometimes I have to ask questions of other people. Well, how do you do this? Or what application would you use for that? Because it's something that nobody can truly master. And then finally, I'm going to share lots of content. Like I said to Peter when I was talking to him earlier, this is actually a condensed version of a 2-day training. So you're going to get about an hour high-level summary of that training. And it's going to give you a lot of pieces that you can pick and choose what you want to focus on. I kind of liken it to a buffet. You have all this stuff about data that you could focus on, but you want to pick and choose what you want to focus on because not everyone's going to focus on the same thing. So, no problem. Brad, nice to have you here.
You.
And was it Charlie? All right. There's a worksheet you can follow along with, just some of the high-level tips, and in case you want to get some notes. Awesome. So, let me ask you guys another question. By a show of hands, how many of you here use an application besides Microsoft Excel to work with data? You guys use something else? Most of you do something besides Excel. That's good, right? Actually, most people do most of their analytics in Excel. Most companies, and you don't use that, that's okay. So as you all probably are familiar though, Excel is a pretty common tool for doing spreadsheets. You find it being used across businesses for all kinds of analysis. People look at the data in that. And then you can use, in addition to Excel or on top of Excel, you can use other applications. So some of them are very powerful ways to do things like visualize data. Some of them help you build predictive models. What are the ones you're using? Charlie, what do you use besides Excel? Microsoft Word, okay, cool. Word, what else?
I use something called Top Broker.
Tab Broker, okay, so it's a specialized one for the insurance industry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Airtable.
What's that for? What do you use that for?
Airtable's a relational database.
Okay, perfect, okay. Yeah, see, just like that, I'm sure most of you have not heard of everything. In fact, I hadn't heard of Airtable.
Oh.
And I work in this stuff all the time.
Okay.
There's always a new app, a new software, a new thing. It's impossible to know everything because every company, every organization has a different setup. So that's a good start though. It's pretty much, we have a pretty broad perspective. How many of you ever heard of the term business dashboard? Couple? Okay. I mean, it makes sense what it is. We'll talk about it briefly a little bit later on, but you have to help me get a sense if you had heard the term before or not. How many of you have ever worked with groups of people or do yourself predictive modeling, making predictive models to predict what you should do based on that data? A few of you? Okay, good. And then finally, how about data storytelling? This is kind of like the buzzword of the year right now. Everyone's trying to figure out how to do data storytelling with the data in their business. So most of you are kind of like, maybe, but no one's really doing this right now. So, okay, that's fine. A little bit?
Well, I guess like demographics, I would use it for demographics.
Okay.
Like when you compile information, like for example, what I do, whatever the case may be. So if a client is asking me questions about like our listenership as far as they want to, strike a certain demographic, so the data that we compile and what we know, then I guess we can kind of narrate, tell a story like, okay, perhaps you will do good in this area because this is the type of group of people that we're meeting, this is the group of people that we're reaching.
You got it, exactly. So that's the whole point, is trying to find different ways besides just doing analysis, whether it be visuals or models or storytelling. These are kind of like the different avenues people take the data once they have it. Once they're able to analyze it and do things with it, they can apply these kind of techniques to it to do, like Charlie was saying, to be able to help build a narrative around the data he's looking at. So big data is what we have right now, and everyone talks about this term big data. It's the wave of disruption. If you imagine data, it's like a tsunami. And a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations, a lot of people are not able to stay on top of the wave. They're actually getting crushed by it. To survive the tsunami, we have to be like a surfer on top of that wave. And our analytics engines, our tools, our applications, the things that we're doing to manage and process and analyze that data is our surfboard. And that's where we want to be. Because if we're not being on top of that wave, we're being disrupted by big data. I'll give you a great example. This is a screenshot for Waze. We're all familiar with Waze, right? Mm-hmm. It's a GPS app, right? Imagine Waze. Imagine how this works. Think about it for a second behind the data. Waze is a real-time GPS app that gives you directions from point A to point B, but it updates constantly. And the information that feeds into Waze is a lot of information coming in real time. It's weather reports, it's traffic reports, it's police reports, it's other users' data, and all that's being processed in microseconds and spits out onto your phone or to a device that tells you turn left instead of turn right. And if you leave here today and you use Waze to get home, it won't tell you the same way every day. Some days it will vary based on different conditions out there, right? That kind of stuff is incredibly disruptive. It's disruptive in how we go about our lives. Think about how we got along before we had things like Waze, before we had GPS.
Right.
We had to use maps, right? Imagine if you spent most of your life working for a map company or owning a map company. This completely disrupted your ability to do business and probably put you out of business, right? This is just an example. So I always ask, to think about what is the disruptive force in your business, in your industry. You're either going to be on top of that wave by using things like Waze, by creating situations. Maybe you don't create your own app, but you learn how they apply the data to make decisions. You either stay on top of the wave or you get swept up by it. That's the challenge we have right now with big data. If you look at what out there, what people are saying about data and analytics and all this kind of stuff, there's hundreds of examples when you do a Google search. Like, why is big data important? Or why should I care about analytics? Or how will it make my business more profitable? Well, just for example, I pulled this from BainConsulting.com. Businesses that apply analytics in their business are 2 times as likely to be in the top quartile financial performance, 3 times more likely to execute decisions as intended, and 5 times more likely to make decisions faster. There's little doubt that analytics has value.
Do you mind if we take pictures of?
Oh no, actually, yeah, and you have, if you don't have it here, yeah, take a picture.
I'm not sure that's
it's
on.
It's not, yeah. So go ahead, take
Okay.
whatever you want.
All right.
So the value here is trying to figure out what you can do in your process, in your data management, to make things better, to optimize them, which will allow you to do things like mitigate risks and identify new opportunities and, of course, make you more profitable. They say that data is the new oil. And I love to think about this concept. If you think about the top companies in the world right now, as far as their valuation, their influence, their power, they're all tech companies. Most of them didn't exist 10 to 15 years ago. If you were to look at the Fortune top 10 companies from 20 years ago, it'd be all energy companies like gas and power, and it'd be banks. And now it's all these .coms. They use data in ways that's amazing and sometimes even frightening. I'm on, like just yesterday, I was looking for a hotel, right? I'm going to be taking a trip, and I'm looking at a hotel on a hotel website. Then I go into my Facebook, and right there in my news feed is an ad for the same hotel. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't remember ever giving Facebook permission to do this. Obviously, I did at some point, right? But that application of data is scary. Now, if you're in a business...
Did you do a Google search?
I did.
Was that, okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I did it,
They
right?
did retargeting.
Yeah, so they Google sent to Facebook what I was doing. All happened like that.
I was gonna say that's like the whole digital marketing base.
Exactly.
So what happens is every time you sign up for a free app, the app really isn't free. So they have your IP address.
Right.
And so that's how they're able to, that can be like comprehensive digital marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people, when you're presenting things to clients, you can actually give detailed information as far as the age group, where they live, how much money they make based off their IP address.
Exactly. And that's the demographics that you were talking about earlier, right? You understand this kind of stuff. Understanding your market, segmenting your market so that you're only targeting the ones you want. If you're not doing it, your competition is. And that's the biggest challenge we have right now, right? Especially if we're working in businesses that aren't funded like Google or Amazon, because they have teams of people doing this, right? Hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they have machines doing it constantly. A lot of us don't. So we have to kind of figure out, how do we play in the same playground these guys are in? Well, we have to get better understanding how to use the data in our business. This is a visual I saw the other day I thought was awesome. This is all the data out there. This is all the big data, right? That's all the noise. What you actually need from all this stuff is just the information right here in the green. But what you're probably capturing is a small fraction of it. You're probably capturing mostly noise and not a lot of information. What I mean by this is, if you're looking at data and you're pulling things like transactional information, you're pulling things like customer profiles, you're looking at user behavior and all this kind of stuff, and you're trying to analyze it, trying to figure out which data you should be looking at when, and not wasting time looking at things you shouldn't be looking at, is a practice, a technique, an art that takes a while to figure out. And this is one area where a lot of companies go wrong. They spend too much time and energy, and often money, on looking at all the noise and not focusing on this. A great example was Facebook, right? It's not how many likes you have, it's how many people are engaged, right? That difference in metric. All the likes mean nothing if they're not going to buy your service, if they're not engaged with you. So that's kind of how we look at that on a broader concept. All that data you have available out there, what are you capturing? And it's really challenging, and I don't want to scare anyone, but it's challenging because there's what we call the 5 V's of big data. You have these different things that we have to worry about when we talk about data. Data is not just size. We say big data, we think size, and volume's where it starts. There's a lot of information out there. In fact, we create so much information every day, it's scary. Think about this. If you're like most people, especially if you're like my son who's 20, the first thing that happens when he wakes up in the morning, before he even gets out of bed, he's already on his phone looking at stuff, downloading stuff, talking to his friends, doing different things. And he himself, before he gets out of bed every morning, has created hundreds if not thousands of rows of data for some analyst somewhere to analyze, to figure out his patterns of behavior so people can sell something to him. Imagine that times 7 billion people, right? And then as many businesses out there. We have so much data, and it keeps growing. In addition, data keeps coming faster. We keep getting more and more in real time. In fact, if you think about Waze, in a lot of ways, Waze
Yeah.
would be like magic from a few years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we were to go back to 1995 and show someone Waze, they would think it was like just some kind of made-up game or something. It wouldn't look to them like it was something that could be possible. How could you process that much information when we had to use floppy disks, right? How could you, back in that time? Now we don't have. Now we have the ability to put so much more on a phone. I mean, my iPhone's got more processing power than any computer I ever owned. And except the last couple of years, I've got some Macs that are better. But for the most part, this thing is more powerful than any computer around for the last 50 years. Things come really fast. Plus, we have to worry about value. What is data actually showing us? It used to be things that fit neatly into a spreadsheet. Zeros and ones, binary numbers, simple calculations, things that we can compute. Now it's so much more. It's statistical events, it's correlations, hypotheticals. When you start getting to what they call data science, which is kind of like analytics on steroids, it's much, much more complex. So this is where you have to have a whole another area of understanding. And then, to be honest, we have to worry about if the data is valid. We live in a world of fake news.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know what's true and what's not true sometimes. We have to constantly make sure the data we're looking at actually tells us what we're looking at, especially if it's not our own data. And then we have to worry about the variety of data. It's not just data that we have in our computers, in our databases. It's things in social media. It's said that about 80% of all the data out there available to you to work on in your business isn't stored in your computers or your databases. It's actually on the web. You have to go out and find it and find ways to bring it in. Great example is Facebook. If you have a Facebook business page and you look at the Insights tab, it shows you a bunch of data. It shows you demographics of who's looking at your page, who's following you. It shows you what time they're looking at stuff and where they're coming from when they're looking at stuff. It gives you all this stuff, and it's free and it's downloadable. You can bring that into your analysis really easily. It's an example of how the data variety has changed. So, not to scare anyone, but this is why it's complex. This is why Amazon and Google spend billions of dollars on trying to analyze their data, because they look at the big picture and are able to figure out how to do things to stay ahead of everyone else. All right, so now that we've talked about how big data is and how scary it can be, let's break it down into a more easily understandable process. There are 6 parts of analytics process. First, you have to inspect the data. Then you have to clean the data. Then you have to transform it, model it, discover patterns, and make suggestions. A lot of us spend a lot of our time on the first part, trying to find the data we need And then once we have it, make sure it's the right data, we can look at it and say, yes, this will help me, or no, this is not what I'm looking for. Then we often have to clean it. Cleaning could mean we have to fix typos or reformat stuff or convert things. It takes up time. Once we've done that, then we have to actually start taking that massive amount of data and transforming it into information. We funnel it or distill it just down to what we're going to use. Then once we have that, we start building models. The most basic way to build a model is a pivot table in Excel. It takes a lot of information and makes it understandable. It makes it manageable, something you can actually get your head around. Once you've built that model, then you're able to actually do the analysis. So we call it analytics, we think it's analysis, but there's actually 4 steps to good analytics before you actually even get to the point of analyzing the data. Then once you analyze the data and you discover patterns and you see things that you want to take action on, you have to share that in a way that gets the decision makers. Now, if you're the one analyzing and the one making the final decision, this can be the same thing. But for most of us, we're in organizations where we're either doing this, or we're doing this to give to someone who does this. And that's where a big challenge can come as well. We struggle to find ways to share information in the way people will take action. So, long story short, this is kind of the process of analytics. And if you're going to take a deeper dive into this and really understand analytics as a process, you would figure out, are you able to inspect data easily? Do you have the right data you need? You would figure out how to clean things in ways that could automate processes and make it more efficient. You would figure out how to transform things without you having to do it. You know, it could be running macros or formulas or doing things within database environments, joining data tables, whatever it may be, you're transforming data. And then your modeling can come from doing things like not just looking at things in Excel on a pivot table, but building very complicated predictive models using statistical analysis. This can sound very, scary and very complicated, but that's what big companies are doing. That's what people on the cutting edge are doing. They're constantly modeling data to be able to find patterns. And this now is starting to be done more and more by machine. All this stuff actually up to this point is basically being done in some companies, by machine learning and by AI. And then finally, the decision makers. Are decision makers getting what they need when they need it? Are they able to take action based on the analysis they get? Is it real time or is it slow? One of the things that always worries me about big companies, and I mean big companies like Wells Fargo, for example, as cutting edge as they try to be, as much as they're trying to stay out there ahead of the game and be ahead of the other banks, they still do a lot of things that are slow. For example, they batch process things. They have month-end reporting. They get to a point where they look at the month in arrear and figure out what happened. And by the time they're doing that, some of their competitors are already figuring out where to go. And a lot of our organizations and companies that are around today, they don't have the ability to predict the future. They can't see what's coming because they're so focused on looking at what happened. That's an example of where suggestions aren't being pushed to decision makers the right way. So, sure.
They're not slow, they're too busy opening up accounts and other things.
Yeah. I always worry about when I talk about he works for Wells Fargo. I'll just tell you, I got out before all that stuff started happening. Although I did see it coming, I could tell you a whole story I won't take up now, but I used to look at data and go, you know what, I think some people are doing something bad here, and I'd send a lot to the bosses, and they'd be like, it's all good, we don't care. So, 4 types of analytics. This is the last deep slide I'm going to share with you guys. It's kind of the foundation. This one is basically talking about how difficult it is to do different types of analytics. I mentioned Wells Fargo still does a lot of batch processing, slow stuff, month-end stuff. They look at what happened. Then they try to figure out why did it happen. This is called descriptive and diagnostic analytics, right? Most people can do this. You look at all the data you have, which is a set of data from something that's happened already, and you look through it and try to figure out what's happening and why. And you can kind of predict off that. You can do trending, you can do forecasting, but it's best guessed based on the data you have. Once you get above that, and you get to the top of the pyramid, it's a whole new world. It's called predictive analytics. It's what will happen, right? What's most likely the case? This is the kind of stuff that a lot of small business and entrepreneurs aren't able to do because it requires statistical analysis. It requires tools and experiences that people struggle with. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it sounds intimidating when you first think about it. And once you get to the top of the pyramid, you're doing what's called prescriptive analytics, which is not just thinking about what might happen, but giving you a very specific point to take action on based on all this analysis. Waze is an example of prescriptive analytics. It prescribes what you should do at any given time with any given set of variables that are constantly evolving, what to do. This is the top of the pyramid when it comes to analytics. This is where Google lives. This is where Apple lives. We probably all live somewhere down here. And if we're too far down here, eventually it's probably going to kill us. We can be successful in doing what we're doing without applying a lot of analytics to. But as the world gets more and more competitive and people that are on the top get more and more data driven, it's creating this gap, this chasm between the haves and the haves not when it comes to data. Part of why I do these talks, why I take my time to come and do this kind of stuff, why I'm not working for Wells Fargo anymore, is I feel a personal need to get out there and help smaller businesses and entrepreneurs and people getting into the field to figure out how to bridge this gap. Because this is scary to me. I don't want to live in a world where we only have 12 companies, because those 12 companies all dominate the data environment and can do everything and crush everyone else, right? I want to live in a world where we have a lot of people that can do a lot of this stuff. That's why I do these talks. So, any questions so far?
Just the other day, I went to get some gas, and there were 12 Amazon trucks in there. I'm thinking, they're taking over the world.
They are. It's scary. It's a good scary because I use Amazon all the time. I like having Amazon, but at the same time, I worry about what it's going to do to us long term as far as the way we do business. So, all right. So now I'm going to give you some tips, some things to write down, take note of, and follow up on. When you look at your data, you want to be able to apply these three methods to it. You want to be able to identify the data, inventory it, and integrate it. Now what I mean is, like, you have a question in your business. Say Peter's trying to figure out, he wants to go to Wisconsin. And he's trying to figure out which city in Wisconsin to go to first. To go out there, spend some time getting to know the people, start doing some discussions, some talks, go and talk to the Chamber of Commerce, whatever you may be doing to grow your business in Wisconsin. Which city do you choose, right? So you have to think about a lot of things. You think about, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. And to do that, you're going to look at some data, in theory, right? You're going to look and see that which is the biggest city, which is the city that has the most people that are most likely to buy my service. Who needs insurance? Who's the most underinsured, or who has the niche where I can target? Maybe it's Madison. Maybe it's not Milwaukee. Maybe it's more likely that you can do more good in Green Bay or somewhere else. You wouldn't know if you just guessed. You'd have to do some research. And the more research you do, the more data you acquire, you have to be able to, once you identify that, bring it into an inventory. Now, for most of us, an inventory means put it in Excel, and start using it to analyze it. For some of us, we can do more than that. We can put it in other kind of data environments. We can do things that have a different size or scope to it. But the bottom line is we're building an inventory. And it's very important that we structure this inventory in a way that allows us to quickly get to the data and remember how we got there and build an environment around it. I like inventories to, I know some of you are like a little bit too young to really spend a lot of time as a kid in the library, but most of us, we can remember going to the library to look for a book, right? For a book report or something like that, and we had to use a card catalog to go figure out where things are at. And every book in that library is in a certain place based on the card catalog system. So if you need a book on Russian literature because your teacher has you trying to figure out, which Russian poet was more, I don't know what, I'm making this up, but which Russian poet was more in with his times, right? So you go and find a book on Dostoevsky, and you go look at Dostoevsky's stuff, you know where to go in the library to get it, right? Same thing with our data. We have to build that kind of inventory so we know where to go when we get it. A lot of us make mistakes in the fact that we rush through things, we stick stuff in files, we forget where we put them, we don't catalog them. So tip number one is catalog, inventory your data, right? Give it away, put it in certain files, name it certain conventions, do certain things that allow you to quickly find it. And then as you inventory your data, it allows you to do your analysis faster. And once you're doing that, then you got to think about how you're going to integrate that. Now that you have this data, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to put it into a report? Are you going to share it in a meeting? Are you going to do something that will have a visualization to it? Are you going to put some pie charts and line graphs together? Are you going to use it for a data story? Are you going to build a narrative around it? So think about how you're going to integrate that. And as you kind of plan this out, you get better and better about using your data. Now, it seems like it's a no-brainer, but a lot of us kind of rush through this. A lot of us look at data analytics as something that we can just do when we have time, and we don't build up a practice around it, which will help us be more strategic. So if you have these 3 I's, if you're doing these 3 I's, that's how you start leveling up. It's step number 1. Step number 2 is to look at what I call the 3 T's. The 3 T's are talent, technology, and technique. Now we have to recognize in our organization, it's part of our team and our business, even if we're just one person, do we have the right talent to do the analytics we want to be able to do? If we do, great. If we don't, how do we get it? Do we hire somebody? Do we go to training? Do we get ourselves upskilled? What do we got to do? Do we have the right technology? Can I do it in Excel? Or can it be done better, quicker, faster, stronger in some other tool? If there is, what kind of tool works for me? There are some great tools that are really expensive, and there are some bad tools that are expensive. It's hard to know which tool to use. However, there's also some great tools that are free or inexpensive. So it's a matter of getting to know which tools, which technologies are the right ones for you. So you can do a lot of research, and you can ask questions about what are you trying to do? Do you want to make better visuals? Do you want to be able to do data stories? Well, you can figure out what's out there and use those applications to be able to help you with technology. And then there's technique, knowing what to do, when to do it. A lot of this comes through trial and error from practice. However, there's some shortcuts, and I'll give you another tip. One of the easiest ways to learn analytics, say you want to be able to go back to your office and you want to be able to better inventory your data, and you want to get better at Excel because you know that's where you're going to do most of your analysis. Don't go sign up for a training class. Don't go do a certification in Excel. You can do that if you want to, but the best way to solve this problem is go to YouTube. Type into YouTube, search engine, how do I do this? And you're going to see hundreds of experts talking about how to do step by step on exactly what you want to do. I wish I had YouTube when I learned Excel. Back in the late 90s when I was starting my career, I had to read books like this thick on how to use Excel. Now I just go to YouTube and I forgot how to do that formula. What is that formula again that allows you to cut all the extra spaces out of a text string? Oh, I forget. Oh, I'll go to YouTube. Boom. They show me exactly how to do it, right? So, Charlie?
I take it away from the class. I was thinking when you said that, I was like, you should have hoped Janet Jackson performed at the Super Bowl earlier because she is the reason why YouTube was created.
Exactly.
So we have Janet Jackson today.
Yeah, okay. That's a good point.
Technology.
Well, I like Janet Jackson, so I'll keep that one. Next time I listen to one of her songs, I'll be thinking about that.
Because the Super Bowl incident.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Everybody wants to see that infamous.
Yeah, that was crazy. That's definitely when YouTube started taking off. So good point. Okay, so that's the 3 I's and 3 T's. The next thing to do is we're going to think about, do you have those 3 I's and 3 T's in place, right? And if not, which one do you want to focus on? You want to be able to get it, right? You want to get it, not just IT, but analytics in general. So what I can do with you is walk you through an assessment real quick. And this is a short version of what I do times when I'm talking to people about their business. Figure out where you're at in analytics. This is a starting point, right? It's a quick self-assessment. And we can go into this more depth if you want to do something one-on-one. But for this class, basically just kind of think about, do you have data analysis right now? If you do, it's only a few people doing it. Is it something everyone's doing, some people are doing? How consistent is it? And basically you want to kind of figure out how do you start building that roadmap to level up? How do you build something to move forward? This is where a lot of the cutting edge companies are at. They're at level 5s. Everyone's using data. If you were to ever walk into, and I've seen some of this stuff, walk into Google or walk into Facebook and look at their analysts and what they're doing and the things they're doing with their data, it's amazing. It's like Star Trek. It's mind-boggling how advanced they are, right? Then you walk into another business and you think they'd be very, very data-driven, but they're still doing a lot of old-fashioned stuff. So every business in between, no data and lots of data, is to figure out how to level up. And pretty much all of us live somewhere in here, and we can probably start figuring out in our head how we level up. And that's what you want to be able to figure out. That's where your next step is, right? So I'm talking about all this stuff, and I'm throwing it out at you, all these different terms and things to think about. But the end goal of this conversation is for you guys to think about what you need to do to level up, to get it. A couple more things I'll talk about real quick as we're kind of going through. We've got about 15, 20 minutes left. So there's this term called data governance. And good data governance is the key. Data governance is a term, like it sounds, it's basically rules governing the use of data in a business. It could be a big business or a small business. But what are the people, process, and technology that are employed in using data? When you have the idea of what your data governance is, then you start seeing your data in what we call a data lake. A data lake is a collection of places data stored in a business. Now, you could have a couple spreadsheets on a server. You could have things on the cloud. You could have things that are stored on one computer's hard drive. When you look at all that together, if it's just a small business, or in a big business, if you're looking at data warehouses and data things here and here and here, whatever size you're looking at, when you encompass all that data in a business, it's called a data lake. And it's called a data lake because people look at data as it flows through a business like water flows through an ecosystem. Now, a data lake is a place where you can do a lot of things. It's basically a storage repository that holds a vast amount of raw data in its native format. And you want to be able to be a fisherman. You want to be able to go out and fish for the exact fish you want to give you the ability to feed your family or to sell it or to use it to raise more fish, whatever you want to do. All this data in the lake, all the water out there, you don't need all of it. You just need a piece of it. And you want to be able to grab it when you can. You have to have a well-governed data lake to do that. In fact, well-governed data lakes look what we call data reservoirs, where it's a well-managed data environment where you can do a lot of things off that data. When you don't have good, healthy data environments like data lakes or data reservoirs, it's usually because you have data silos. Now, data silos, as IBM puts it, is the most common challenge associated with big data, fundamental, even traditional information integration problems. Bottom line, they have silos. Data is not shared easily. Now, in bigger companies, this looks like people just have data in different places. In smaller organizations, it's like I said before, you have data in the cloud, you have data on this computer, you have data on this server, and your data is not well integrated. This is really a root cause of most bad analytics, is these silos. And in fact, these silos cause data swamps, where your data becomes a monster, where nothing can grow in the lake and it'll eat you. And by the way, that's Walter, my avatar. I had someone make a computer, avatar version of me. So that's Walter. You see some of these photos. So that's the data environment. Here's some tips on good data governance. This is what I talk about more for corporate and for when I do training. I talk about things like data stewards and data entry, automate data, look for best practices, making sure that you find the right way to monitor trends and validate you regularly. This is kind of stuff I know not all of us can do. But you don't have to get lost in the terminology and the scope. You just have to think about the lesson. The lesson is, how do you govern your data? How do you inventory it? What are the things you're doing with your data? That's where you start when it comes to leveling up, is making sure that you have your data identified and inventoried so it's clean and easy to use and you can make sense of it. And then you can focus most of your time and energy on analyzing, putting the data to action, and not getting stuck and bogged down in the data. A lot of small businesses choke, they get in data swamps because they don't have good data governance. And it's because they don't think of it in that big picture way. They think of it as like a side part of the business. It's a piece of the thing. Maybe they have part of it outsourced. Maybe they don't have it well managed. But that's where they're going to actually have to fix first before they can figure things out. Sure, Brad.
How do you manage data integrity?
So
I have outside people doing data entry, right? And
That's a
just
big
my
question, yeah.
own control issue is always that they're not going to do
Yep.
it
Yep.
cleanly, or they're in a rush, or they don't care as much as I do. And so if there's bad data, I don't know it until I come across it.
Yeah, that's
And that just
exactly.
creates anxiety for me.
That's exactly the way I feel. And
Okay.
I'll say this, in my experience, and I've worked with hundreds of companies and situations, outside data entry never lives with expectations.
Yeah.
People never treat your data as well as you'll treat it yourself.
Yeah,
Now, that said, it's an easy thing to outsource,
right.
especially if you have as trying to take a lot of raw data or
Yeah.
data that's input from written forms
Yeah.
or free form things. So don't sell that one short though.
Okay.
If you're going to outsource it, make sure you put some effort into making
Yeah.
sure you validate that vendor's good. Don't let it be the cheapest thing you do.
Yeah, no.
I always think of this lesson is that I look at a lot of recruiting and HR processes where people are trying to figure out how to get their data better structured and get more value out of their data in a recruiting process, trying to recruit people. And I ask them about, well, where does the data first come in? How do you source your data? Well, I have an intern that types in all these information cards we got at the job fairs. And okay, well, that's your problem right there. You have more problems than that, I'm sure, but that's where it starts. Because you have somebody who's not invested in giving you quality data in a process that's full of errors. So you're not going to be able to trust your data.
Right.
So that's not a great way to have world-class HR, is to start the very first piece of the puzzle
As the lowest person
as the
on the
lowest
totem
person on the
pole,
totem pole.
yeah.
Exactly. So, which is a challenge because it's mind-numbing, it's boring.
Right.
So that's why we sign up to interns or people that are new to the group or whatever.
Right.
So, but it's a great point, Brad.
Okay.
Any other questions? Keep moving on. Okay. I'm going to share with you a quick case study. So, I have this chance to work with this company called Coffee Bean. It's in LA, and they have a lot of branches all over. I'm not sure if they're in Chicago, but they're kind of like a Starbucks. And I was working with one of the branches they have in the Philippines. And I was doing a training class, a full 2-day training class, kind of talking about the kind of stuff we're talking about now. And at the break, a couple of the analysts from the class came up to me, and they said, "Hey, we're business analysts. We work for Coffee Bean, and we have a challenge. Our boss wants us to figure out why some of our branches have low coffee sales. We just can't figure it out. We look at our data, and we can't tell why they're having low coffee sales." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" Like, "Well, we can tell which ones have low coffee sales, but we can't tell why." They're trying to figure out how to do some diagnostic analytics, right? And they're stuck doing the descriptive. All they can look at is a certain part of data. So I sit down with them and I walk them through a process to build a data map, to look at all the data in their business and figure out how it comes in, where it's stored, where it goes to for analysis, how it's extracted from the analysis and pushed to decision makers, and trying to figure out in that process where there's things that can help them figure out the answer to their question. Because the data they have isn't the data they need. They need more data. They need different data. But before they go out and start looking for data, they got to figure out the data environment to make sure they're getting the right data they want. And they build a way to extract and share that data in a way that doesn't cause a lot of manual work. So I walked through this process with them, and it started with a simple conversation. And it's kind of hard to read, but there's a receipt here. And the receipt is a receipt that I had remembered from a meeting that I had. And I went to Coffee Bean, and I had this receipt, and I kept it for tax purposes, but this is in my box of receipts. But the whole, long story short, I took this receipt with me to meet with the analyst because I had a point to make. And if you look at the receipt, I know it's kind of hard to read, and I know it's in fact, this is pesos, not dollars, Philippine pesos. So, but the point is, I asked them to think about all the different data points that are captured in a point of sale transaction, right? Every transaction they have, that creates data. And that data is stored in a database. And it captures things like location, time of day, date of the month, what was bought, how much it was paid for, what the cashier's name was. There's a lot of stuff in there. And if you start thinking about this from an analyst perspective, why is this store having low coffee sales? And what can I start looking at to help me understand what's causing those low coffee sales? Now, the first thing might be maybe it's a question about staffing. Maybe the training isn't very good for those employees. Maybe they don't like their jobs. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's a really dirty, well run down store. These are the kind of things you could tell from looking at transaction stuff. So just because you can tell which stores have low transactions amounts for coffee sales doesn't tell you anything else about it, right? So you got to go out and find out more stuff. And the other thing I thought was kind of cool is I took this receipt because there's one thing here I didn't buy.
Coffee.
I didn't buy coffee.
Did she offer you coffee?
She did not.
All right.
Right? It was the training
What's the
issue, right?
right?
Yeah, exactly. It made me think about that.
Right.
No, I didn't get change before I took a taxi. I had like a high denomination bill, and I didn't want to have to negotiate with a taxi driver how to get change from him, so I had to break the big bill. Anyway, long story short, with Coffee Bean, I walked into this process, and what we did was we mapped out all the sources of their data. For them, they had finance data, employee data, store sales, and their ad hoc analysis. And they had all that data feed it into a data sources, but it was all different. This was cloud-based, and this went to one server, and this is HR data they couldn't touch, and all this kind of stuff. They had to actually build a new database to bring all this stuff in. So it would all come into one place. So they didn't have to go out and pull from different places. It would all flow into one place they could analyze. Then they could do their analysis, and they could share that with managers, the marketing team, and training to train the staff members to sell more coffee. And they were able to figure out, how to increase the sales in these stores. The funny thing is, when they found out the real story behind this, is that what was causing low coffee sales, more than anything else, was the inventory, was the supply. Some of the stores had smaller storage rooms and couldn't store as much coffee. And they had no way of knowing that until we went through this exercise to figure out what are the different data sources. One of the things we looked at was inventory data. How can you know how much coffee is in a store to be sold? And see if that translates.
And so were they running out?
They were running out of coffee.
Oh, really?
And so they weren't getting it, and that was causing the low coffee sales more than anything else. There were other factors as well,
Right.
like training and so forth, but that was the biggest one.
Also, you think if people go to a store and they're out of what you want
Right.
a couple times,
Yeah.
you're not going to go back
Exactly.
to the store. You're
So
not
it
going to try to
causes-
go back. You're just going to go.
That's what I mean, the secondary
Yeah.
effect, right?
Yeah.
It was the primary was the inventory, but beyond that, people
Right.
would just get frustrated.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you also look at non-data things that are more anecdotal,
Yes.
where like what do you guys, what's the stores that are selling a lot that are similar in size or similar in demographics, what are they doing?
Right.
And looking at the customer experience versus
Yes,
the other
exactly.
customer experiences.
And that's where we had this conversation that led up to a whole bunch of different types of analysis that they hadn't thought of doing. I mentioned the staff member training was a big issue. A lot of people were being put out there on the floor without having any formal training. And things like that you wouldn't see in data. Hello, let's have a seat. So long story short, that's Coffee Bean, right? So what I would want you guys to do, and you have this written down, and we're not going to do it right now, but I encourage you to do this as a take home. It's something to do when you have a chance to think about this, is make a list of all the places that data comes into your business, right? How does data come in? How's it entry into the business? How's it enter into the business? And then where's it stored? Like I said, some of it may be in the cloud, some of it may be on your laptop, some may be in a central computer, some may be, in the office somewhere, in a server or whatever. Put all that on paper, visualize it, look at that map, look at all the people that are involved. Who is involved with moving data? Is it just you? Is there somebody else? Is it an IT person? Is it outsourced? And then who receives the data? Whether it be data they actually do something with, they take action, or they're reviewing stuff, or it's going to maybe someone down the road. I mean, if you're worried about the government being an end receiver of your data, then that's part of this as well. So just kind of sketch out on a piece of paper this map. Do what Coffee Bean started to do, and it will help you identify areas where you can try to clean things up, how to build that better data environment. So this is an example of a marketing firm I work with. These are all applications they had and how we structured it with them, right? They were they had a struggle trying to figure out how to get people proficient in all these apps, because this is all the things they were using. They were using a dozen different applications when it comes to the data in their business. They were using applications that brought in or stored data, like Salesforce and Marketo and Bullhorn. They were using applications and softwares that were managing the data, like Hadoop and an Oracle database. They were using applications to manage or to analyze the data, and then applications to visualize the data. So they had one person that could do this, and one person that could do this, and they had all kinds of problems because they had too many applications that were sometimes redundant, and nobody had an idea of how it all fit together. So as an exercise, we sat down, we walked through all of it. I got together with all the people involved and all this kind of stuff, and we built that map. We talked about how everything flows. We came up with some inner ways to interconnect things, and it helped them get better in understanding how to use the data in their business. This is the kind of stuff that we want to do in our business, because this is what generates optimization. It generates chances to mitigate risk, and it generates new opportunities, and of course it generates more profitability. Coffee Bean has been very successful in their expansion out west and into the Pacific. I'm surprised they haven't come back into the East Coast yet. So anyway, that's another company marketing. Anyway, so I'm going to move on to visual marketing real quick. Sorry. Slow down, take a breath. Visual learning. One of the problems I have is I love this stuff like a nerd, right? And I could all day. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about visual learning. We talked about the data structure, the data environment. Now we're going to talk about how to present data, right? Because one of the challenges people have is, how do I get people to do something? I look at data and I know what to do and I know it's clear, but I share it with decision makers or partners or other people, and they just look at it and go, yeah, whatever. They still do what they want to do. They still trust their gut. They still go off of instinct. They still go off of what they've always done. They're not being data driven. The way to get them more data driven is to understand how people can interact with data if it's not their data. The first is understanding visual learning. Most of us learn visually. When we show somebody numbers in a spreadsheet, the average person, even if they're very successful in their business and they're pretty tech savvy, the average person's going to go like, that makes no sense to me. It makes my head go crazy. I used to work for this guy at Wells Fargo that was an amazing salesperson. He's the kind of guy they say can sell ice to an Eskimo, that kind of guy, just sell anything. But for the life of him, he couldn't do Excel. He thought pivot tables were magic. And when I would do something for him, he'd be like, that's amazing. And then a week later, he'd call me up and say, hey, can you come help me? I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Run the pivot table, fix it, boom, done. 5 minutes, I had him fixed again. He'd be good for a couple weeks, then he'd call me back. He just could not ever get himself to be very good at stuff. So what I learned over time is I had to show him how to visualize his data. So he wouldn't just look at the reports as numbers, but start looking at it as visuals. And one of the cool things about visualizing data is that there's a lot of cool tools out there to use. most common ones are the visuals that are in Excel, that are part of Excel. We all know a pie chart, a line chart, a bar graph, that kind of stuff, right? These are all things we see all the time. But the ability to use them effectively is very, very hard. It's not done very well. It's not hard once you learn it, but it's kind of like this lost art, this mystic art that most people don't ever think about. When you build a pie chart that looks perfect to you, there's no guarantee it's going to look perfect to everyone else. And if it's not looking perfect to your audience, it's going to cause them stress because people are visual learners, right? As an example, it's a little hard to see, but there's just like this two different data points, right? There's a bar and a line, and same data asks people, what do you see, right? So here, it's showing the number of Dutch and the number of US people as far as height, the average height, right? So what's the average height of Americans, the average height of Dutch, the people from the Netherlands, right? Dutch people are on the average taller than Americans. The average height of someone who lives in Holland is taller than the average American. So when you show it like this, it's pretty clear USA is smaller than Dutch. But when you show it like this, it's not quite as clear. This is the average American, the average Dutch, and the people in between. It gets a little confusing. It's much clearer when you show a bar versus a line. This is an example, right? Just one simple example. We constantly, from no fault of our own, screw up our audience's ability to learn from us because we use the wrong visual. This is a whole master class that I teach at times, and there's other experts out there as well. But this is something that you have to take a time to figure out. And the best way to do it is when you visualize the data, when you build a pie chart, ask somebody if it makes sense to them. And if it does, okay. If it doesn't, then you got to go back and figure it out. Because a lot of times, like I said, we create things that make sense in our head, and we really don't spend much time thinking about how our audience is going to interpret it. And what may make sense to us may not make sense to somebody else. Like my boss, Danny, things that made sense to me, I could make sense of, he couldn't. So I had to figure out how to make sense for him. Because I wasn't adding a lot of value to himself or for my time management by having to go fix things for him all the time. When I figured out how he wanted to see it and I could change the way I showed or presented my data to fit him, then it made it much simpler. So that's this example. The thing about visualizing data is that there are the common ways we do things. We look at pie charts and so forth. It's simply, it's converting data into visuals on the surface, but the best analysts are the ones who can actually visualize that data and start telling narratives with it. They use the data to tell a story. And one of the best ways we're starting to see people use more and more of this ability to visualize data into a narrative, it's called a business dashboard. And so a business dashboard, for example, looking at a sales dashboard for an airline company, trying to figure out, what are their sales, how's their sales department's overall performance, are they having impacts to the sales team, is the sales team, engaged and doing well? That kind of stuff can be presented in a quick visual dashboard that will show people information they can take and go and do something with. We react faster to visual cues than we do text, right? The most common visual cues out there that we often overlook are simple ones that we learn when we were very young. If in a visualization, you want to show something good, a positive story, a positive trend, make it green. If you want to show something scary, something warning, something you should be worried about, make it red. Because when we were 1 year old, we started learning the lesson that green means go and red means stop. And green means money, and green means profit, and red means danger, and red means scary. That kind of stuff is ingrained in what we do. So we should apply that kind of simple logic in our visuals. We should also think about what's clean, what makes sense, right? We do things like people have this tendency when they visualize data to want to put light text on a dark background versus dark text on a light background. When we all learned how to read, the majority of the books we learned how to read on, once we got past the little kid books, was dark text, black text on a white background. That's how we absorb information for most of our lives, right? When you show somebody something and it's light blue text on a pink background, it takes longer for the brain to kind of figure out what the heck they're talking about. And it can lose the audience. There's a lot of data out there that talks about how we cause cognitive dissonance when we present data. We throw people off by doing things like making positive stories highlighted in red and mixing up the dark versus light text and background. These kind of things, like I said, it's an art form that has turned into a science, and it's kind of the missing art that people have out there. When you're building dashboards, you want to keep it simple. This is Stephen Few's kind of the grandfather of dashboards. He said that numbers are an important story to tell. They rely on you to give convincing voice. The idea here is that you have to give the data voice. You have to tell the story. Your data will only do so much. You have to think about how it impacts people. He talks about how the most basic dashboard should have 4 quadrants. Your most important data is right here. Whenever you do a presentation, this is where people look. Why? Because for most people, that's how they learn how to read. When you open a page, you look at something for the first time, you're drawn to the upper left-hand corner. Charlie?
I'm sorry, so you say you would oppose to business cards that might have color and flavor to it?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah. There's evidence that even though it looks great,
Right.
and it's going to cause people a second to like look at the card and make sense of it.
Right.
Your cards should be light background, dark, bold lettering, nothing too small. Make it simple. People will use it. If you make it, if it looks colorful and cool to you, but people can't look at it from here and read it, they're actually more likely to let it go. And I'm not making that up. That's like proven stuff.
And also,
So,
yeah,
yep,
I
Brett?
would add, so I missed the beginning, but my background's in marketing.
Uh-huh.
So we do marketing branding agency.
Mhm.
And so like white space is important
Exactly,
also.
yep.
Like in a business card, everybody wants to put every
Yep.
piece of information they have on there so that they can get contacted. But if you have a URL and a web address and a phone number and a couple other things, if they want those other connections, they can find them through your
Yep.
website or
Yep.
yeah. So don't feel like the need to put everything, the same with the dashboard.
Yeah.
It's like the white space gives you mental breathing room.
Yeah. So that's our tip. Is when we're
Yeah.
building visuals,
Yeah.
think of how to minimize things
Yeah.
versus because everyone wants to maximize, and it's proven that actually minimization.
Minimization.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Brad.
yeah.
Get tongue-tied sometimes, talking too much. So anyway, what are your most important things you want to put in your visuals? What runs your business? What are your key performance indicators? What are things you want to share? Those are the things that you should put in big, bold, right there in front. All right. Real quick, I'm just going to zip through a couple slides because we're almost out of time. I'm going to take a lunch in a few minutes. So types of business dashboards, there's analytical ones and operational. If you're trying to build an analytical dashboard, you're trying to look at things from a tactical standpoint, a strategic standpoint, looking at things over time. If you're an operational dashboard, it's more a dashboard designed to look at things that are tactical. A couple examples. This is a website dashboard where you're looking at your most important KPI, number of visits, and then you have other KPIs that support it that are all strategic, all looking at things like top page views, traffic sources, level of engagement. This is the kind of stuff that people worry about when they're trying to figure out, is their website, is their web page getting what they want out of it, or do they have to change it, make updates to it, do something to change customer behavior. That's a strategic example. That's an analytical dashboard. An operational dashboard is more like in the moment. This is for a call center. Number of calls, average answer speed, abandon rate. These are the key metrics that run a call center. If they're not good, they're in the red. You have the ability to look at stuff and make quick decisions. If you're a manager in the call center, you can tell which of your agents is having, struggling, so you want to go out there and coach them. You can figure out where your averages are at and what your limits are. This kind of stuff right here quickly and easily visualizes something for an operational perspective to go out and do something.
What are those CR trend lines?
So the CR trend lines are call resolution.
Oh, okay.
So their average call resolution is up or down where they're currently at in the trend.
Okay.
I actually just grabbed that off Google, so I
Could you
keep
go
it the best.
back to what kind of occupational would you use analytical again?
Analytical would be strategic, right? So it's not an occupation, it's a use, right? So if you want to be able to look at big picture stuff over time, if you're trying to see the strategy in your business, where you're trying to get to grow your market share, trying to get more engagement, and you want to look at it over several months or a year of time, that's a strategic dashboard. An operational would be more like in the moment, how things are right now. So, okay, so a couple more tips on visualization. When audiences see organized graphics, they get it. They're able to make sense of the numbers, and they get that they're not in chaos. But if you do things that cause them stress, you're going to lose your audience. Knowing how to use the right bar chart or column chart or heat maps is really important. So this is one of those areas where I suggest you guys, if you want to improve your visualization, this is where you go to go to YouTube and get some tips. There are some great people out there. One of my favorites named Cole Nafik. She's amazing. There's another one, Lila Garani. They're basically YouTube stars when it comes to analytics and data. So
Cole what?
Nafik, K-N-A-L-F-I-C. Something like that. She'll
Okay.
come up.
Yep.
And then she's a really great visual aid. She's worked for Google. She's amazing. There you go. Charlize. Happy you're here. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Again, this is a whole day worth of stuff that we're kind of zip through, but just kind of think about your visuals. The last thing we're going to talk about is data storytelling. So great stories stick. Stories drive who we are and what we do. And the best storytelling when it comes to using data allows us to craft narratives that influence decisions. So just to think about, though, before we talk about data storytelling, just storytelling, what is storytelling? What is your favorite story? What is a story you saw or read about when you were a kid that you still talk about fondly today? For me, my all-time favorite novel was a book I read back in 7th grade, Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens, right? French Revolution. It's an epic story of love and action and tragedies, a love triangle set during the French Revolution back in the 1780s. I'm a history major, I have all this interest in that kind of stuff, so it defines who I am when I tell you that kind of stuff. But it's my favorite novel of all time. We probably all have a favorite novel. And if we don't have a favorite novel, because some of us, especially the younger we are, they don't have favorite novels. They just have favorite movies. What's your favorite movie, right? For me, my favorite movie is Star Wars. When I first saw that, and this will tell you exactly how old I am. You can do the math. I was 8 years old when Star Wars came out, and when that text came across that screen the first time, it blew me away. It's one of the clearest memories of my entire childhood. Was the first time I saw Star Wars, and I love it. It's just an epic tale of action about a young farm boy who goes off and saves the universe and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, great stories. What's your favorite story? Anybody want to share a favorite movie or novel, something that you like to talk about? One of your favorite movies?
I still like Mahogany to this day.
Diana Ross, right? Yeah. It's a great movie. A very powerful story, right? It's a biography, right? So, personal story that is quite deep. What else? Anybody else? Brad? John? Anybody want to share? Peter? Favorite movie, Peter?
The book I remember from high school the most was called A Separate Piece by John Knowles.
Okay.
And it was about a bunch of guys that were kind of between high school and going to college,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of the stuff that they ran into in that summer, and kind of discovering friendship and
Okay.
loyalty and that type of thing.
Cool. Peter, what about you? What's your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Rocky.
Rocky. Great.
There you go.
Yeah. These are all very powerful examples,
Strong.
right? And we all could name them. We all have them, right? Why I want you to think about that is now I want you to think about how you feel when you share your love for that subject matter. Now, when you're doing data storytelling, you have to do the same thing. Because data storytelling is all about connecting the heart and the mind, right? The mind sees data. The mind looks at visuals and can make sense of it. But to be able to influence somebody to make decisions, you have to appeal to the heart. You got to bring emotion into it. And unless you're a very, very logical person, which most of us are not, we want to be, but we're not, you got to be able to find a balance. And data storytelling is that finding that balance. It is like I said, it's the skill set du jour right now when it comes to data. Everyone's trying to figure out how to do it better and do more of it, especially the big companies. I think of the best data storyteller of all time in the technical age and things we talk about now. Like when Steve Jobs used to come out and announce the new Apple products, it was an event. It was and he would do it in a way that was very, very dramatic on purpose, right? He'd have that black turtleneck, right? He'd come out on the stage. It'd be he would tell you about the new iPhone or the new iPad or whatever, and he would use words to describe it this is the greatest thing ever built by man.
Right.
And he would do it in a way that would be pretty convincing. And he would have data in the screen in the background, telling you about how many pixels the camera was and telling you how much storage you could do. So he would tell you a story and back it up with data. That's an example of data storytelling. Now, there are times in what we do that we need to be able to do the same thing. Not every time. We don't do data storytelling every single day of everything we do. But for moments when you want to be able to influence decision makers, you have to be able to get them to a point where your data is telling you this is what we should do. Now, I caveat this by saying, if your motives aren't good, you could do bad things with it. This has a negative dark side to it. which is also part of the whole Star Wars thing, right? There's a dark side to data storytelling where you can do it to, for what many people might think is, bad things, taking advantage of people, driving misinformation, pushing fake news, that kind of stuff could all come out of this as well. But for most of us, we're going to use data storytelling to be able to influence the decision makers to do something based on our belief that our data is telling us if we don't do this, it has consequences. I'm going to give you one more example of something from my experience. When I took over Wells Fargo, back in 2009, at the tail end of the financial crisis, Wells Fargo acquired Wachovia. And for those of you who don't remember, Wachovia was a bank that was based in North Carolina, started on the East Coast, kind of moved westward. Chicago's a California bank that moved eastward, right? And throughout the years, Wells Fargo moved further and further eastward. And then at one point, when Wells Fargo acquired Wachovia, it was exciting for a lot of us at Wells Fargo, especially the part of the bank I worked for at the time. At the time, I worked for the money transfer, money remittances, where we send money overseas, right? So people live in the U.S., they have family overseas, they send money home to support their children or send their niece to school or send money to their grandparents, whatever it may be. And when we acquired Wachovia, that for the first time gave Wells Fargo branches in Florida. And we had never had branches in Florida before. It was a new thing for us. So we were super excited because most of you probably know Florida's very diverse. Florida's got a very big immigrant population, especially first generation immigrants that send money home, especially people coming here to work, right? So for us, this could be a huge, huge market that we could jump into. And the great thing was that there were no banks before Wells Fargo came into Florida sending money transfers. It was all mom and pop places, Western Union, that kind of stuff. And that makes a difference because Wells Fargo, being a big bank, can offer pricing that generally is better as far as the value of the exchange rate, the amount of money you can send for the amount, the cost and the fee, than most of these money transfer operators. So for customers of Wells Fargo, this would be a product that would be something that would allow them to send more money more frequently for a cheaper cost to their loved ones than the competitors. So we got really excited about it. And I'm sitting in a staff meeting, and we're talking about this and about the rollout. We're going to do a launch. We picked a certain branch that was rebranded from Wachovia to Wells Fargo. We're going to get out there and we're going to share our story with the community and get them to come sign up for Wells Fargo accounts to send this kind of money, send money to their loved ones. So we're sitting there in the staff meeting and we're going through the room, and halfway through the presentation from the marketing team, I'm starting to scratch my head, and I got a concern. The concern is, if you know Florida at all, this is a map of Florida. Down here is Miami. We were going to launch in Miami. We were going to do our first big press release. We were going to have the media there. We were going to have the mayor come in and do a ribbon cutting on a rebranded branch. All this kind of stuff's going to happen in Miami. Now, that makes sense. Miami's the biggest city in Florida. It's very diverse. It's like 80% people, either first or second generation immigrants in the Miami area. It's incredibly, outside of Miami, all the way up the coast, it's got quite a bit of people from Central, or from South and South America and the Caribbean islands. So, but my mom's from Florida. I just moved to Florida. I know Florida pretty well, been there a lot of times. And I do a lot of demographic research as part of my job at the bank, right? So I know a lot of nerdy stuff about where people live and what they're like as far as their demographics. So as soon as the decision to go to Miami was announced, I was scratching my head because I know enough about Miami to know that there's a population of people in Miami that tend to come from cities and countries that Wells Fargo doesn't send a lot of money to. Most of the immigrants around the Miami area that are Latino, for example, come from Cuba, come from Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, and most of Wells Fargo's experience, being a West Coast-centric bank, is sending money to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Central America, and Mexico. It's a different market. It's still Spanish-speaking, but there's subtle differences. So I'm thinking to myself that if we launch our product in Miami, we don't have any track record of these people. They don't know us. We're not a brand that they've heard being used before to send money to people. And we're asking people to trust us to send money to their loved ones. Their loved ones depend on these remittances for schooling and for housing and businesses and for retirement. So we got to make sure we're doing something that's going to appeal. And so I raised my hand and I said exactly what I told you guys, that I was worried about this. And they go, yeah, okay, but well, we're already locked in. It's going to work fine. And so I got overruled, basically. I got outvoted. So at the end of the meeting, my boss came to me, and Danny's like, I'd worked with him for a while, and I built up a good reputation with him as far as, when I said something about my data telling me to do something, I'm usually right. He knew that. So he came to me and said, Dan, I get your point. I also have that concern too, but if we're going to change this, you got to really have the data to back it up. If we're going to go to the boss, and when my boss said the boss, he meant the CEO of the bank at the time was Dick Kovacevic. We have to tell him why we're doing this, and he's got to sign off on it because he signed off on us going to Miami. So if we're going to change it, you better be right. So I'm like, okay, that's intimidating, right? So I went back to my data, and I had a couple days, before I could put it together, and then we were going to go present it to the CEO and explain to him why we were making this last minute change. And Danny reminded me that the problem was I brought up a problem. The problem was I brought up a problem in the meeting, but I didn't have a solution at the time. He said, Daniel, if we go talk to Kovacevic, you got to have a plan. You got to have a backup. You got to tell us where we're going to go. I'm like, oh yeah. So not only did I have to figure out why we shouldn't launch in Miami, I got to find a place to launch. So I did a bunch of research, and I found out that what's cool about Florida is that there's immigrants all over the place. But majority of them that are in the South are indeed not from countries where we send a lot of money to. However, around Orlando, there's a higher percentage of immigrants that come from Mexico and El Salvador and Guatemala that end up working in citrus, industry, that do things like as simple as picking oranges or working on farms and that kind of stuff. So as I found that data, I was able to figure out Orlando would be our best place, actually, for us, given our name brand with this segment of population, where we should go. So I had to put all this together. I built this map in an application called Tableau. I had demographic data tied to different populations, their countries of origin, to show where people came from, to figure out which ones were the ones that we wanted to target, which are these and not these. And we went in and talked to the CEO, and before I got halfway through my story, he said, okay, I got it. Makes sense to me. Let's make the switch. We switched it. Wells Fargo made a lot of money that year. Things, this launched really well. People were happy. I got a good bonus that year. It was nice for me. But what I did wasn't just build a report and share it. I had to do data storytelling. I had to tell a story by creating a narrative of what's going to happen if we do this, what the consequences are, and what the lost opportunity is, and why we should change our decision at the last minute and switch it. And that's data storytelling. And the way I did that was I followed these steps. The steps are basically, I had to know my audience, bank executives. I had to figure out my time frame, how much time I had to tell a story. I had to figure out how I was going to structure my data, which applications I was going to use. I had to figure out what my key insight to this whole story was. I had to find the right visual. I had to come up with some takeaways, and then I had to end it with bullet points that would stick in their minds. So I crafted this entire narrative about why we should do. And that's what we call the key elements of storytelling. And these are things that you should do when you do data story. And just kind of in closing, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 7 things that you should do before you tell the story. Now, the lesson here is a lot of us, we get our data and we can't wait to share it. Check this opportunity out. Oh my God, if we don't do this, we have this big risk. And we get out there and we talk to people, and we're coming at them with all our data, and they just go like, okay, yeah, whatever, Dan. We're still locking into our thing. We're going to trust our instinct, our gut, our history. To really influence somebody, you don't just come in there and say, hey, we got to do this because of our data. You got to build a story around it. You got to craft that narrative, put the right visual, structure it, and then you tell your story. And it'll be much more impactful. This is why it's a science right now that people are trying to figure out. It's why it's in demand. Because to be able to influence an audience with that data and adding the emotion to it to get them to make a significant change in their decision is why we employ data storytelling. All right, any questions? Okay, thanks. So that's just one example from my career. So real quick, I'm going to wrap up. We're going to have lunch. I do coaching. If you want coaching with me, I have a whole couple different ways you can do it. You can do it online using this really cool tool called Coach the World. I have some special discounts if you want to sign up for today. I have a sign-up sheet here. You can fill it out, and bring it to me, and then I'll take a copy of it, and we can do payment now if you want. And if you want to think about it, feel free to keep this and refer to it.
So do you, by the way, my favorite movie is Joanna Man.
Joanna Man, oh my gosh.
Teamwork.
Yes, it's a great lesson in
I
that.
think that movie should have won an Oscar, by the way. But
Yep. I don't know about Oscar, but I did enjoy it.
So, do you get the data, or you just kind of help the people get the, like, put it together?
It'll
Like, do you
depend.
all-
Every situation is different. So
Okay.
what I would say is the first thing we'll do is we'll sit down and we'll have a half-hour conversation, and you'll tell me about the data in your business, and I'll ask you a bunch of questions, and we'll basically walk through that assessment to kind of assess where you're at. I'll do that for free. That's the free thing for today, just for today. I mean, if you want me to do that half-hour assessment. If you want to do a full hour where we actually, go through it more detailed, I have that as a product. I also offer a series of trainings, 6 online ones, once a week for 6 weeks. And then I do in-person trainings. I do in-person trainings that are half day, I do full day, I do 2 day, depending on how you want to do it.
Are you based here in Chicago?
I'm not, but I come here once a month at least, if not twice. So we would arrange it that way. So either online or in person, it's flexible. So but I don't want to, sell you guys that. It's just I want you guys to know if you have that as a reference. I also have a book that's almost done. Basically, I want you guys to level up your business by doing these things. Be disruptive. Don't be disrupted. Be Waze. Don't be a map maker, right? I should say be disruptive or be disrupted. Got to fix that typo. Thank you for catching that. I saw that. Remember that analytics is a process. And the process should be how do you get data faster? That's the end goal of cleaning up your process, right? Making sure you have the good data governance, making sure you have a clean data lake. Data should come to you faster. You want to find the right data. As you find the right data, you constantly level up in your ability to use that data. You want to make impactful visualizations, which means deeper understanding for your audience. And you want to incorporate the elements of data storytelling to be able to influence decision makers. If you can do those things, then you're going to be rock and rolling when it comes to analytics in your business. Okay? So that is my presentation. Thank you for your time. Now go out and analyze something. Okay, and we're going to have